I'm here today, actually for a combination of reasons. I have a Farm Bureau event here in about a half an hour, but the reason I'm here specifically is to announce the introduction, I think tomorrow or Monday, of legislation that is called the Having of Congress Act, or the Citizen Legislators Act. This bill would not essentially, but specifically do what presidential candidate Governor Perry has proposed, and that is to have the days that the Congress is in session a year. We limit our congressional sessions days to 60 business days per session, which would be 120 for a full 2-year term. It also halves the salaries of representatives and senators in their respective leadership offices. It cuts representative allowances in half, and it in every sense does what I think the American people are asking us to do, and that is to limit government, to limit the time we're in session, and to bring back the concept of the citizen legislator to the congressional process. To be very specific, the congressional appropriation last year was almost $4.5 billion, actually $4.3 billion in funding for ourselves. It is in a variety of contexts: the architect of the Capitol Police, the Library of Congress, staff, as well as congressional salaries. This legislation says specifically that Congress is out of control. It's out of control in its expenditures, and it's out of control in its dysfunctionality. And so this returns the concept of the citizen legislator to the United States Congress. I will either tomorrow or Monday introduce this legislation. It will cut by more than 100%, actually from about $4.3 billion to about $2 billion, the total cost of the Congress. It provides for a variety of details, one of which is to change the ethics rules so that members of Congress can have second jobs. One of the criticisms of the Congress is we become a full-time, self-perpetuating, self-congratulating entity. All we do in Congress is talk to one another. We talk to one another inside the Beltway. We talk to one another in terms of the entire process. And what do you got? You got the most dysfunctional Congress, the most dysfunctional legislative body, perhaps in the world, certainly in the United States, and people are dissatisfied. I'm shocked, frankly, that our approval rating is as high as 9%. The people I talk to, I would estimate more that it's 3 or 4%. But nonetheless, when you have the impasse that we have, the dysfunctionality that we have, the lack of product that we have, in my judgment, we need to take drastic action. And if you're able to bring farmers, teachers, labor union members, journalists, and others in a mix, a stew of sorts, I think you're going to get a better result. We have become a self-perpetuating operation. We don't listen to Main Street, and as a result, Main Street is rebelling, and I think this bill does a lot, if implemented appropriately, to change the mood, to change the result, to change the product. I want to emphasize that we're cutting benefits in half, we're cutting salaries in half, we're cutting office allowances in half, and I think that's appropriate. We also do not allow grandfathering in. We do not allow existing members of Congress to grandfather their salaries, grandfather their benefits, grandfather their office allowances in. And so the result that you have is a farmer like Kevin Johnson, a journalist like Phil Bloomer, a teacher like Joan Dykstra, a public servant like Mark Sheldon, all in a mix, who talk to the real world and who exist in a real world that I think will produce a far, far better product. That's the legislation we're introducing. I don't want to predict what its future will be, because there's certainly people who are going to be making these decisions who are in a position of some vested interest, but I think it makes sense. Unless you get the dialogue going, you're never going to get any results. So that's the bill, and I'm proud to be a sponsor of it, proud to do what we can to get it passed, and hope that it'll change the climate in Washington, D.C. and around the country. Last initial statement. Unlike a lot of my colleagues, I would suggest most of my colleagues, I actually do talk to people in the real world. As a matter of fact, there's one of my call sheets where I call people every day. I knock on doors. I go to restaurants. I go to coffee shops. And people are extraordinarily unhappy with the United States Congress. They are ready to throw all the bums out, and with good reason. If we return some sanity, fiscally and substantively to the process, maybe we can restore a faith in the American people that I think is so critical to make our system work better. So that's the bill. Glad to take any questions you might have.
How would this keep Congress from not becoming, not being more partisan or just as partisan as it is now?
I think, Tom, that one of the results will be that when you have less time in session, by the way that we have a penalty for every 5 business days that exceed the 60 business days a year, there's an automatic 10% reduction in the representative salary that's enforced by the treasurer. I think when you have a limited time frame to conduct your business, that there's less likelihood of brinkmanship because there's simply not the time to do it. Does this mean that my center aisle caucus and that my efforts towards bipartisanship is going to all of a sudden spring to great fruition? No, I can't promise that. But I can promise and believe that when you limit individuals in terms of the time they spend there, the salaries that they receive, they're less likely to be partisan than they are now. It's only conjecture.
If this passes, would you consider, going back to law and having a secondary job outside of Congress?
Absolutely, I would. And maybe I have life after Congress, whether the bill passes or not. I don't think those of you who know me think that I'm probably going to vegetate. I'm not going to sit home and watch all my children, whatever the show is, all days of our lives, or soap operas all day. I probably want to do something else. And yes, if this bill passes, I would very much consider going back to the law practice. And that might be something I would do at some point in the future anyway.
Now, your opponents, and you have, I think, 4 of them now, will say that, in both parties, will say that this is just an election you're ploy, that this is just, you're just trying to make yourself look good.
Well, they're right. They're right that I want to make myself look good, but I want to make myself look honestly good. I do want to be somebody who stands out. I do want to look good, and I want to be good. I want to do things differently. I want to stand out as somebody who actually cares about making the system work. I would point out that most of my life, contrary to some of the accusations to the contrary, I have been a citizen legislator. City council member, I certainly was. And in my 24 years in the state legislature, I practiced law. I owned a Baskin-Robbins ice cream store. I owned a small law practice, and I had rental property. So until I went to Congress, I have operated in the private sector. I know what it's like to make a living. I know what it's like to bring in dollars and to spend dollars, and I realized that to make a law practice work or a Baskin-Robbins ice cream store work, you've got to bring in more revenue than you spend. But somehow, in Washington, D.C., we've turned that on its head so that we're borrowing 43 cents of every dollar we spend. And that, Tom, is the very reason why this is necessary. If you don't have people in Washington, D.C. who know what it's like to work in the private sector, who just talk to each other and say, let's just kick the can down the line a little bit more, let's increase the debt limit a little more, let's just a little more government, a little more spending, it'll all work. At the end of the day, it doesn't work. And that's the reason that lawyers, farmers, and teachers, and journalists who have to run their houses and their households and their business in an effective way would make for a more effective congressman. If you can't have another job, at the end of the day, you don't realize what it's like to have to bring in more than you spend and to increase the debt limit to $17 trillion. The difference is when the News Gazette or Johnson Farms spend more than they take in, they go bankrupt. The federal government increases the debt limit. And so that's the difference. But in terms of your question, I don't think it's an election year ploy. I've proposed things of this sort before. Phil, I think we pointed out here a number of the other pieces of legislation that I've introduced. The Government Shutdown Prevention Act, the Baseline Reform Act, the Biennial Budget, the Expedited Line Item Veto, the Taxpayer's Right to Know, the Stock Act. I've tried to be an example of somebody who's different. But you know what? At the end of the day, I'm not sure that people recognize that. I think people probably do recognize it. Kind of put us all in the same basket. But I do want to try to stand out as somebody who cares and who believes the government is out of control and it needs to be drastically reformed.
I want to ask you, President Obama has asked Congress, he wrote John Boehner asking about the debt ceiling, increasing that by 1.2 trillion. Can I just kind of get your response on that?
It's the same guy who bashed, said it was essentially un-American to increase the debt limit as the United States Senator.
Well,
That's my answer.
okay.
Tim, you'll obviously have a lot of citizen support for this kind of bill, but what kind of support you going to have in Washington over this kind of a bill? Is it just going to be overlain and say, yeah, nice try it, and not ever bring it to the floor for vote?
Unfortunately, that's, Gail, you're a sage observer. The fact of the matter is, most people are making $174,000 a year with all the benefits. Don't have to account for anything except once every 2 years. The odds are pretty good that since they all talk to each other and they're all inbred, they're not going to be very excited about this legislation. But frankly, I don't give a damn.
Do you have co-sponsors? Have you asked around yet?
I haven't asked. We'll email it around. Or there'll be some people who I want to point out, I'm not endorsing Rick Perry, but I did talk to Rick Perry's, Joan has too, to Rick Perry's people, and this was actually, give him, I don't want to plagiarize his idea, this was in part a result of Rick Perry's ideas. We have 6 presidential candidates, and they all have a variety of good ideas, and I think this is a good idea for Rick Perry.
Are you close to endorsing any one of them?
No. I'm endorsing whoever's nominated for the Republican convention.
So you're going to stay out of it before the election?
Yeah, I may not. I may endorse somebody to do that. I will say that while I certainly respect Governor Perry and I like his idea here, that at this point I have no communication with anybody who like to endorse it.
I want to ask you about the Excel Keystone pipeline. President Obama hasn't taken any sort of action on it yet. If he says no to it, what sort of contingency plan could Congress have?
I thought that was in the bill passed. Requirement, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
that
he's got to act.
He has to act on it. So there's certain damages. I don't really, I'm not prepared to know what he's going to do or what the congressional response was. I know the legislation that was passed by unanimous consent, the Senate bill that I deviated from my party on, contained that.
Tim, on a subject in regards to the Farm Bill, before the super committee, if you will's failure, the House and the Senate Ag Committee pretty well came to consensus in some values and some agreement. Are we going to have to reinvent the wheel again with the Farm Bill, or do you think that we're fairly well set on both the Ag Committees?
I'm not sure. What you're asking.
Well, we're going to have to reinvent the Farm Bill.
KJ, you got to help me.
Yeah, guys, that's it.
I don't think we're going to have to reinvent the wheel. I think this is going to be a very difficult task. I'm going to talk to a bunch of farmers here in about 5 minutes. So we're going to tell me legitimately that we've got to have shared sacrifice, and we can't ask the farming community alone to sacrifice. But we'll see how it all plays out.
We talked about presidential endorsements. Do you think you'll make any endorsements in the local races, some Illinois
Yes.
Senate races?
I guarantee you that will happen in the relatively near future. There's at least one House race where I've been asked to endorse in a number of races. One House race. I've been asked to endorse in every race, at every level, for every office. I think even a few Democrats have asked me to endorse them. They don't want me to endorse their opponent. So there isn't anybody at the presidential level, at the state level, or otherwise that hasn't asked for my endorsement. There will be at least 2 that are forthcoming. At least 2. But you know what? I want to make sure that my endorsement means something. I don't want to pass them out like candy. I want to make sure that the endorsement is significant, that it's heartfelt, and that it will have an impact. And so, me endorsing somebody over in Henry County probably didn't make a whole lot of difference. Me endorsing somebody in Livingston, Plain, Fort Iroquois, or Coles, Edgar, Douglas, Pyatt might make it. And so I tend to do that. And when I do it, and Mark is in charge of this, we don't just endorse people and just let it roll. We're going to tell you about it, first and foremost, but we also have a data bank of tens of thousands of supporters of mine in each one of these areas. If I endorse somebody, let's say, in Fort County, I intend to not only endorse them, but to also let all my supporters know who I support.
Can you say which races you'll be endorsing?
Will I say that? I'll say it when I say it.
Okay.
These are Senate races, though?
Senator, House, or both.
Okay, legislative, okay. One more thing, do you have any concerns about the super PACs? And
Yeah,
I think
absolutely we do. We do. You know what can happen with a super PAC? I haven't seen the FEC fundraising figures. This is somebody, by the way, who voted for McCain-Feingold and who believes that election reform is necessary, who the Supreme Court doesn't agree with. I can see poor fundraising totals for a variety of candidates for a variety of offices until October. And as soon as there's blood in the water, the super PACs are going to swoop in with millions of dollars, negative ads to beat up on people in congressional and other districts, Senate races around the country. I think there's an inordinate amount of power that they've arrogated to themselves. But the Supreme Court apparently has given us very little latitude to regulate this, as long as there's no relationship, quote unquote, other than wink, between super PACs and the candidate themselves. I think that's unfortunate. I think it's a diminution of democracy in some ways, but it's free speech, and it's the Supreme Court, and we've got to live with it.
Is there a way to fix that legislatively?
We've tried to pass Feingold and otherwise. I think the ways of limiting it are really, really limited. I would certainly look at opportunities to limit it, that's for sure. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good to see you.